The dust settled on the main street of Coyote Creek as the autumn sun cast long shadows between the weathered buildings. Margaret Harlow stood on the porch of her newly inherited ranch house, her slender fingers gripping the railing as she surveyed the land that stretched before her. 6 months a widow, and the whispers still followed her like vultures circling overhead. At 42, she had the kind of beauty that hardship couldn't erase. High cheekbones, stern gray eyes, and auburn hair streaked with silver that she kept tightly bound at the nape of her neck. The death of her husband, Victor Harlow, one of the wealthiest cattle ranchers in the territory, had left her with land, livestock, and a reputation to defend in a place where a woman alone was seen as either prey or problem. The Rocking H Ranch had been Victor's pride, built from nothing into an empire that stretched across 5,000 acres of prime Montana territory. Now it was hers, along with the debts, the rivalries, and the secrets her husband had accumulated over 20 years of hard living. Margaret's hands bore the calluses of a woman unafraid of work, but the weight of running such an operation pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The ranch hands respected her enough, or feared Victor's memory enough, to follow her orders, but she could feel their doubt hanging in the air whenever she gave instructions about the cattle drive or negotiated prices with the merchants in town. "Mrs. Harlow," called a voice from the barn, breaking her reverie. It was Thomas Jenkins, her foreman for the past 15 years, a man whose loyalty to the ranch had never wavered. "The men are ready to move the herd to the north pasture." His leathery face betrayed nothing, but Margaret knew he worried about her. At 55, Jenkins had seen the worst the West had to offer and survived it all with quiet dignity. His presence was one of the few comforts she had left. "I'll be right there, Mr. Jenkins," she replied, straightening her back and adjusting the collar of her riding jacket. The cattle business waited for no one, not even a widow still learning the ropes of her inheritance. As she stepped down from the porch, Margaret noticed a rider approaching from the main road, the unmistakable figure of Sheriff Ethan Crawford, astride his dappled gray gelding. The lawman had been a frequent visitor since Victor's passing, ostensibly to check on her welfare, but Margaret sensed other motives beneath his concern. Crawford had never approved of Victor Harlow's methods, even as he maintained a cautious respect for the rancher's power. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know what city you're watching from today. The sheriff dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. At 48, Ethan Crawford cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a full mustache peppered with gray, and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Harlow," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Thought I'd ride out and see how you're managing." His gaze swept over the ranch yard, noting the activity around the corrals and the smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney. Everything appeared to be in order, which seemed to both satisfy and disappoint him. Margaret offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "As you can see, Sheriff, we're managing just fine. The Rocking H continues to thrive." She knew what people said in town, that a woman couldn't possibly maintain Victor's empire, that she would eventually be forced to sell, that perhaps she had never deserved such good fortune in the first place. The rumors about her past in St. Louis had followed her west, despite her efforts to bury that chapter of her life alongside her first husband's name. "Glad to hear it," Crawford replied, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "There's been some trouble with rustlers near the Blackwater Creek. Thought you should know, considering your north grazing lands extend in that direction." He paused, studying her face. Strange times when a man like Brady Wilson shows up in our territory. Been asking questions about local ranches, particularly this one. The name hung in the air between them like gunsmoke. Margaret's composure slipped for just a moment, a flash of recognition crossing her features before she could suppress it. Brady Wilson, a name from another life, another time, a dangerous name. "I appreciate the warning, Sheriff," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden hammering of her heart. "But the rocking H can take care of itself. We always have." She gestured toward Jenkins and the waiting ranch hands. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a herd to move." Crawford nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Victor may be gone, but the law still has an interest in what happens out here." He mounted his horse with deliberate care. "I'll be keeping an eye on things." With that parting remark, he turned his mount and rode back toward town, leaving Margaret to wonder just how much the sheriff knew or suspected about her husband's death. As the sun dipped toward the western horizon, Margaret rode alongside her men as they moved 300 head of cattle to fresh grazing grounds. The physical work helped quiet her mind, though she couldn't shake the unease that Crawford's visit had stirred. Brady Wilson in Coyote Creek could only mean trouble, the kind of trouble that might unearth secrets she'd fought desperately to keep buried. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. A storm was brewing, both in the gathering clouds and in Margaret Harlow's carefully constructed world. The cattle drive took most of the day, and by the time Margaret returned to the ranch house, darkness had fallen completely. She dismounted stiffly, her body aching from hours in the saddle. As Jenkins took her horse, she noticed a lamp burning in the study window, a room she'd left dark. Someone was inside. Her hand moved instinctively to the small revolver she kept concealed in her riding skirt, a habit Victor had insisted upon in a territory where danger could come from any direction. With careful steps, Margaret approached her own home like a stranger, listening for any sound that might betray the intruder's identity. Through the window, she could make out a man's silhouette seated in Victor's chair, comfortable and waiting, as if he belonged there. Margaret's fingers tightened around the pistol's grip as she pushed open the front door, moving silently through the darkened parlor toward the study. She paused at the threshold, gathering her courage before stepping into the lamplight. The man looked up, a slow smile spreading across his handsome face. "Hello, Maggie," said Brady Wilson, swirling amber whiskey in one of Victor's crystal glasses. "It's been a long time." Margaret's throat went dry at the sight of him. 20 years had passed since she'd last seen Brady Wilson, but he was still unnervingly the same. Dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples, eyes the color of a winter sky, and a smile that had once promised her the world before delivering heartbreak instead. He wore the clothes of a successful businessman, rather than the rough attire of the outlaw he'd been in his youth. "What are you doing in my home, Brady?" she asked, keeping her voice level despite the turmoil his presence aroused. The revolver remained hidden in the folds of her skirt, a last resort she hoped she wouldn't need. "Your home?" Brady's eyebrow arched in amusement. "Last I heard, this place belonged to Victor Harlow, but then again, last I heard, Victor Harlow was very much alive." He took a sip of whiskey, studying her over the rim of the glass. "Imagine my surprise when I arrived in this dusty little town to learn that my old friend Victor had met with an unfortunate accident. A fall from his horse, wasn't it? How terribly convenient for you." Margaret stepped fully into the room, her posture rigid. "Victor was my husband. His death was a tragedy, not a convenience. If you've come here to imply otherwise, you can leave the way you came in, through the window, like the thief you are. Her words were brave, but her mind raced with calculations. Brady knew things about her past, about her connection to Victor, that no one else in Coyote Creek could possibly know. His presence threatened everything she had built. Brady laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Still the same fierce Maggie underneath all that respectable widow's propriety. He set down his glass and stood, moving toward her with the casual confidence of a predator. I didn't come here to cause trouble, Maggie. I came because Victor and I had unfinished business. Business worth a considerable amount of money. Since he's no longer available to settle his debts, I thought his grieving widow might be interested in making arrangements. What kind of business? Margaret asked, though she already suspected the answer. Victor's past had been checkered with questionable partnerships and investments, a history he'd tried to legitimize once he'd established himself as a respected rancher. Brady Wilson had been part of that past, perhaps the darkest part. Victor left his affairs in order. If he owed you money, there would be a record. Not this kind of debt, Maggie. Some things don't make it into the account books. Brady's eyes hardened. Your husband and I had an agreement. $15,000 for my silence about certain events in Kansas City. Events involving a bank robbery, a murdered guard, and a promising young rancher who suddenly came into enough money to buy this spread. He gestured around the study. Victor understood the value of my discretion. I expect you will too. The blood drained from Margaret's face. She had known pieces of Victor's history, enough to understand that his wealth hadn't come entirely from honest work. But she had never allowed herself to examine the details too closely. Plausible deniability, Victor had called it, a protection for her if his past ever caught up with them. Victor would never have agreed to blackmail, she said, with more conviction than she felt. Call it what you like. He agreed to $15,000. Brady moved closer, close enough that Margaret could smell the whiskey on his breath and the faint scent of tobacco that clung to his expensive suit. I'm not an unreasonable man, Maggie. I'm willing to negotiate terms with you. After all, we have our own history to consider, don't we? Margaret's hand tightened on the revolver, still hidden but ready. That history ended a long time ago, Brady. Whatever was between us died when you left me in St. Louis with nothing but empty promises. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. A wound she thought had long since healed, suddenly raw again. I don't have $15,000 to give you. The ranch is land rich, but cash poor, as you probably know. Brady's smile turned predatory. Then perhaps we can come to another arrangement. Victor's gone, and you're alone out here, with responsibilities too heavy for a woman's shoulders. You need protection, Maggie, a partner who understands this business and the secrets that come with it. His hand reached out to touch her cheek, a gesture both intimate and threatening. We could be good together, just like we planned all those years ago, before Victor Harlow stepped between us. Margaret jerked away from his touch, finally revealing the revolver and pointing it steadily at his chest. Don't flatter yourself, Brady. I'd rather lose everything than become your partner in any sense of the word. Now get out of my house before I forget that I'm a lady and put a bullet where it would do the most good. The tremor in her voice betrayed her fear, but her aim never wavered. For a moment, tension crackled between them like lightning before a storm. Then Brady stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. You always did have spirit, Maggie. It's what I admired about you. He reached slowly for his hat on the desk, careful to make no sudden movements. "I'll go for now. But this conversation isn't finished. I'll be in town at the Silver Dollar Hotel. Think about my offer. $15,000, or we find another way to settle Victor's debt. One way or another, I'll collect what I'm owed." After Brady left, Margaret locked every door and window in the house, though she knew such precautions were meaningless against a man like him. She sat in the study until dawn, the revolver on the desk beside her, thinking about choices made and paths not taken. Brady's return had shattered the fragile peace she'd managed to create after Victor's death. Now she faced a threat that could destroy not just her future, but the very foundation of her present. As the first light of morning crept through the windows, Margaret made a decision. She would not run, and she would not surrender. The Rocking H was her home, bought with sacrifice and hardship. She would defend it, no matter the cost. In the cool light of morning, Margaret dressed with particular care, selecting a high-necked blue dress that conveyed both respectability and means. If she was to face Brady Wilson again, she would do so on her terms, not his. She pinned her hair severely, applied a touch of rose water to her wrists, and tucked the small revolver into her reticule. A lady prepared for all contingencies, just as Victor had taught her. Before leaving the ranch, she sought out Jenkins in the stables, where he was inspecting a lame horse. "Mr. Jenkins," she began, choosing her words carefully, "a man named Brady Wilson is in town. He claims to have had business dealings with my husband." She watched the foreman's weathered face for any sign of recognition, but Jenkins merely nodded, waiting for her to continue. "If he should come to the ranch while I'm gone, he is not to be admitted, under any circumstances." Jenkins straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Is there trouble, Mrs. Harlow? The boys and I can handle any unwelcome visitors." His loyalty was implicit in the offer, a reminder that she was not entirely alone, despite Brady's insinuations. The ranch hands might work for wages, but their allegiance had been earned over years of fair treatment. First from Victor, and now from her. "Just an old acquaintance with unreasonable expectations," Margaret replied, unwilling to burden Jenkins with the full truth. "I'm going into town to settle the matter once and for all." She hesitated, then added, "If I'm not back by nightfall, send word to Sheriff Crawford. Tell him—" She paused, considering how much to reveal. "Tell him to check the Silver Dollar Hotel." Jenkins' expression darkened with concern. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer company on this trip, ma'am? These roads can be dangerous for a lady traveling alone." His protective instinct was genuine, but Margaret knew this was a confrontation she needed to face by herself. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins, but some battles must be fought alone." She offered him a reassuring smile. "Keep the men working on the north fence line today. I want that repaired before the first snow." With a final nod, she climbed into the buggy and set off for Coyote Creek, her mind racing with possible strategies for dealing with Brady Wilson and the threat he posed. The main street of Coyote Creek bustled with the usual morning activities as Margaret guided her buggy past the general store, the blacksmith shop, and the small church that served as both spiritual center and social hub for the community. She felt the weight of curious stares as she passed. The rancher's widow rarely came to town without purpose, and speculation about her business would fuel gossip for days. Margaret kept her head high, ignoring the whispers that followed her progress toward the Silver Dollar Hotel. The hotel stood at the far end of the street, a three-story structure that represented Coyote Creek's aspirations towards civilization. Its facade boasted fresh paint and glass windows, luxuries that set it apart from the weathered wood of surrounding buildings. Margaret tied her horse at the hitching post and paused to gather her courage before entering. Inside, the lobby's attempted grandeur, potted palms, a faded red carpet, brass fittings in need of polish, seemed pathetic compared to the elegant hotels she'd known in her youth back east. The clerk behind the desk looked up in surprise as she approached. "Mrs. Harlow," he stammered, clearly uncomfortable with her presence in an establishment that catered primarily to male travelers. "What can I do for you today?" His eyes darted nervously toward the staircase, as if expecting trouble to descend at any moment. Word traveled fast in small towns, and Brady Wilson's arrival had undoubtedly stirred interest. "I'm here to see Mr. Wilson," Margaret stated firmly. "Please inform him that Mrs. Harlow is here to discuss business matters." She remained standing, her posture rigid, refusing the offered chair. To sit would suggest a social call, rather than the confrontation she had come for. The clerk hesitated only briefly before scurrying up the stairs to deliver her message. Minutes later, Brady appeared, descending the staircase with the unhurried confidence of a man accustomed to making others wait. He had exchanged yesterday's travel clothes for a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and perfectly tied cravat, the uniform of a businessman rather than an outlaw. "Maggie," he greeted her, loud enough for the curious ears of the clerk. "What a pleasant surprise! I was planning to call on you later today." His smile was all charm and polite fiction. "Mr. Wilson." Margaret kept her voice cool and impersonal. "I believe we have matters to discuss in private." She emphasized the formal address, establishing boundaries that his familiar use of her nickname had deliberately crossed. To the watching clerk, they appeared to be nothing more than old acquaintances conducting legitimate business. Brady gestured toward a small sitting room off the lobby. "Of course, the hotel has graciously provided a space for private conversations. Shall we?" He led the way into a room, furnished with a settee, 2 armchairs, and a writing desk, modest accommodations for the discussion of $15,000, or the alternative he had proposed. Once the door closed behind them, Margaret wasted no time. "I've come to settle Victor's alleged debt once and for all, Brady. I don't have $15,000, and even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you without proof of this supposed agreement." She remained standing, unwilling to concede even the small advantage that taking a seat might give him. Brady's pleasant expression hardened into something more genuine and more dangerous. "Proof? You want proof, Maggie?" He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper, yellowed with age. "How about a letter from Victor, dated 6 years ago, acknowledging his debt and promising payment? Or perhaps you'd prefer I share the details of the Kansas City robbery with Sheriff Crawford? I'm sure he'd be very interested to learn how your late husband acquired the capital to purchase the Rocking H." Margaret took the letter with steady hands, unfolding it carefully. Victor's handwriting stared back at her, unmistakable in its bold strokes and flourishes. The contents were brief but damning. An acknowledgement of funds received, and a promise of repayment with interest. No specific crime was mentioned, but the implication was clear enough to anyone who knew to read between the lines. "This proves nothing except that Victor borrowed money from you," she said, returning the letter. "It doesn't justify the amount you're demanding." "The amount includes 15 years of interest," Brady replied smoothly, "and my continued silence about matters that would tarnish not just Victor's memory, but your future in this town. How do you think these good people would react if they knew their respected rancher's widow had once worked in a St. Louis gambling house? Or that she married Victor Harlow a mere 3 weeks after meeting him, just as he came into the funds to buy this ranch. The threat hung in the air between them, a noose tightening around Margaret's carefully constructed life. Her past in St. Louis was not as scandalous as Brady implied. She had been a dealer in her uncle's establishment, not one of the girls who provided additional entertainment. But in a place like Coyote Creek, such distinctions would matter little. And while her hasty marriage to Victor had raised eyebrows, no one had connected it to the timing of the Kansas City robbery. No one except Brady Wilson. "What you're suggesting is blackmail, plain and simple," Margaret said, her voice low and controlled, despite the fear coursing through her. "I won't be threatened, Brady. Not by you, not by anyone." Brady moved closer, his height allowing him to tower over her, despite her own considerable stature. "Call it what you like. Business, blackmail, or an opportunity. It all ends the same way. Either you pay what Victor owed, or we find another arrangement." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're still a beautiful woman, Maggie. We had something once, before Victor stole you away with his promises of respectability. We could have something again." Margaret fought the urge to step back, to show any sign of the revulsion his suggestion provoked. "What we had was a mistake born of youth and desperation. I was 18 and alone in the world. You were charming and full of promises you never intended to keep." The bitterness of old betrayal colored her words. "You left me with nothing, Brady. Victor at least offered me a home and his name. And now I'm offering you protection," Brady countered, his voice softening to the seductive tone she remembered from her youth. "Times are changing, Maggie. The big cattle operations are pushing out smaller ranchers. How long do you think the Rocking H can survive with a woman at the helm? The men respect you now because of Victor's memory, but that won't last. You need someone who understands this business, who can help you navigate the challenges ahead." For a moment, doubt crept into Margaret's resolve. Running the ranch alone had been harder than she'd ever imagined, and the future held uncertainties she could scarcely prepare for. But surrendering to Brady would mean surrendering everything she'd built: her independence, her dignity, the respect she'd earned through months of proving herself capable in a man's world. "I need nothing from you, Brady Wilson," she said finally, reaching for the door. "Not your protection, not your partnership, and certainly not your bed. Keep your threats if you must, but remember that I have friends in this territory too. Friends who might be interested to learn about your own activities since Kansas City." It was a bluff. She knew nothing of Brady's life in the intervening years, but she delivered it with enough conviction to give him pause. Brady's expression darkened. "Don't test me, Maggie. You won't like the consequences." He blocked her path to the door, his body uncomfortably close. "I'll give you 3 days to reconsider. 3 days to come up with $15,000 or a more personal arrangement. After that, I take my story to the sheriff and anyone else who'll listen." His hands shot out suddenly, gripping her wrist with punishing force. "And don't think about running. I'll find you, just like I found you here." Margaret wrenched her arm free, fighting to maintain her composure. 3 days, then, she agreed, knowing she needed time to formulate a plan. "Now get out of my way." With as much dignity as she could muster, she swept past him and out of the room, conscious of curious eyes watching her hasty exit from the hotel. Once outside, there was another freedom. Sai is introducing a memory. This is Star Wars. This is the epic setting and a monumental, timeless, and memorable moment. Margaret wrenched her arm free, fighting to maintain her composure. 3 days, then, she agreed, knowing she needed time to formulate a plan. Now get out of my way. With as much dignity as she could muster, she swept past him and out of the room, conscious of curious eyes watching her hasty exit from the hotel. Once outside, there was another freedom. Sai is introducing a memory. This is Star Wars. This is the epic setting in a monumental, timeless, and memorable moment in audio. Safely seated in her buggy, Margaret allowed herself a moment of pure, unadulterated panic. Her hand, but flight would solve nothing. He would find her, as he'd found her here, and the next time, there might be no community of neighbors and loyal ranch hands to provide even the illusion of safety. As she guided the horse toward home, Margaret's mind raced through her limited options. She could try to raise the money, perhaps mortgage part of the ranch, or sell some of the prize breeding stock. But $15,000 was an impossible sum to gather in 3 days without raising suspicions. She could appeal to Sheriff Crawford for help, but that would mean revealing Victor's crimes and her own complicated past. Or she could eliminate the threat Brady posed permanently, a solution that whispered in the darkest corners of her mind, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. By the time the rocking H came into view, Margaret had made her decision. She would not run, and she would not surrender to Brady's demands. Instead, she would confront the past that had followed her to Coyote Creek and find a way to lay it to rest once and for all. The ranch house stood solid against the backdrop of the Montana mountains, a symbol of everything she had fought to protect. Whatever came next, Margaret Harlow would face it with the same strength that had carried her through every previous trial. Victor had taught her that much, at least. In a land as unforgiving as this, survival belonged to those willing to fight for what was theirs. Night had fallen by the time Margaret finished her preparations. The lamp in her bedroom cast long shadows across the floor as she carefully packed a small valise with essentials, a change of clothes, her meager savings, and the deed to the rocking H, safely tucked in a hidden pocket. On the bed lay the dark green riding dress she'd selected for tomorrow's journey, chosen for practicality rather than fashion. Next to it rested Victor's revolver, a Colt .45 with pearl grips that he had carried throughout their marriage. Unlike the small derringer she usually carried, this weapon was meant for more than self-defense. It was designed to kill. A soft knock at her bedroom door startled her from her thoughts. "Mrs. Harlow?" Jenkins' voice called from the hallway. "There's something you should see." The urgency in his tone sent a chill down Margaret's spine. She quickly covered the gun with a shawl before opening the door to find her foreman standing there, his expression grave. "What is it, Mr. Jenkins?" Margaret asked, stepping into the hallway and pulling the door nearly closed behind her, hiding the evidence of her planned departure. The ranch house was quiet at this hour, the other hands having retired to the bunkhouse after supper, leaving only Jenkins, who occupied a small room off the kitchen, within call. "Rider coming in from the East Trail," Jenkins reported, his voice low. "Moving slow, like he doesn't want to be heard. Santos spotted him while checking the horses." Santos Diaz was the youngest of her ranch hands, a Mexican boy of 17, with the sharpest eyes on the property. If Santos had seen a rider in the gathering darkness, there was no doubt of the sighting. Margaret's heart raced. "Bray," she whispered, more to herself than to Jenkins. He couldn't wait 3 days. She had known, somehow, that he would come tonight, impatient, confident in his power over her, unwilling to give her time to find a solution. "Get the men, Mr. Jenkins, quietly. I want them armed but hidden. No one makes a move unless I give the signal." Jenkins hesitated. concern evident in his weathered features. "Mrs. Harlow, perhaps you should leave this to us. If this man means you harm—" "This is my fight," Margaret interrupted firmly. "My home, my responsibility." She met Jenkins' gaze steadily. "But I'm grateful for your support. Now please, hurry. And Jenkins, no shooting unless absolutely necessary. I won't have bloodshed on the rocking H if it can be avoided." As Jenkins departed to gather the ranch hands, Margaret returned to her room and retrieved Victor's revolver from beneath the shawl. The weight of it was familiar in her hand. Victor had insisted she learn to shoot properly, not just for protection, but as a practical skill for ranch life. She checked the chambers methodically, confirming that all 6 were loaded, before tucking the weapon into the pocket of her skirt. Then she moved to the window, scanning the darkened landscape for any sign of the approaching rider. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the ranch yard and the rolling pastures beyond. In the distance, Margaret could make out a solitary figure on horseback, moving deliberately toward the house. She watched, tension coiling in her stomach, as Brady Wilson guided his mount past the corrals and the bunkhouse, his confidence evident in the unhurried pace and straight-backed posture. He clearly believed he held all the advantages in their confrontation, that she was alone, unprepared, and vulnerable to both his threats and his proposal. Margaret moved quickly down the stairs and through the silent house. Positioning herself on the front porch, just as Brady reined in his horse at the hitching post, she stood in the shadow of the overhang, the revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt, watching as he dismounted with fluid grace. Even in the dim moonlight, she could see the satisfaction on his face, the expression of a man who believed his victory was assured. "Evening, Maggie," Brady called, approaching the steps with the casual air of a welcome visitor. "Thought I'd save you the trouble of coming to a decision. 3 days seemed excessive for such a simple choice." He paused at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Are you going to invite me in? We have matters to settle." Margaret stepped forward into the moonlight, her posture rigid with determination. "There's nothing to settle, Brady. I told you my answer this morning, and it hasn't changed." She kept her voice steady, betraying none of the fear that threatened to choke her. Around the ranch yard, hidden in shadows, her men waited for her signal, a small comfort against the danger Brady represented. Brady's smile faltered, replaced by a harder expression. "Don't be foolish, Maggie. You know I'm not leaving without what I came for. Either the money or a more personal arrangement." He took a step up, closing the distance between them. "Victor's gone. There's no reason for you to keep fighting this battle alone. We could be partners, just like we planned all those years ago." "We planned nothing," Margaret corrected him coldly. "You made promises you never intended to keep, and I was naive enough to believe them. That girl is long gone, Brady. In her place stands a woman who knows exactly what you are: a thief, a liar, and a coward who preys on those he perceives as weaker than himself." Anger flashed across Brady's features, transforming his handsome face into something ugly and dangerous. "Careful, Maggie. Your position here is more precarious than you realize. One word from me about Victor's past, about your past, and these fine, upstanding citizens will turn on you faster than you can blink." He moved another step closer, now standing just below her on the porch. "What would your loyal ranch hands think if they knew their respected employer was nothing more than a common criminal's widow? A woman with a past that would make even the girls at the Silver Dollar blush." Margaret's hand tightened on the revolver in her pocket, but she maintained her composure. "Is that what this is really about, Brady? Revenge because I chose Victor over you? She saw the flicker of rage in his eyes and knew she had struck a nerve. You left me, remember? Took my savings and disappeared without a word. Victor was there to pick up the pieces, to offer me a life you never could. Victor stole what was mine. Brady's control slipped, revealing the bitterness that had festered for 20 years. The money from Kansas City was my plan, my risk. He took the biggest share and ran. And then he had the gall to take you too. He advanced the final step, now standing on the porch directly before her. Everything he built should have been mine, including you. And now I've come to collect what I'm owed. In one swift movement, he reached out to grab her arm, but Margaret was prepared. She stepped back and drew Victor's revolver in a single fluid motion, pointing it steadily at Brady's chest. Not another step, she warned, her voice deadly calm. I've learned a few things in 20 years, Brady. One of them is how to handle men who don't understand the word no. Brady froze, surprise registering on his face before dissolving into a mocking smile. You won't shoot me, Maggie. You don't have it in you. Despite his words, he made no move to approach her further, respecting the threat of the weapon, if not the woman holding it. Besides, what would your fine neighbors think of a widow who guns down an unarmed visitor on her porch? How would you explain that to Sheriff Crawford? The same way I'll explain the bloodstains on my dress if necessary. Self-defense against an intruder, Margaret replied steadily. Victor taught me to protect what's mine, Brady. The Rocking H is my home, my life. I won't let you or anyone else take it from me. She could see uncertainty creeping into his expression as he realized she might actually pull the trigger. Now you have two choices. Leave Coyote Creek tonight and never return, or face the consequences of trespassing where you're not wanted. For a long moment, tension crackled between them, like summer lightning. Then Brady's expression hardened into cold calculation. You think it's that simple? That I'll just ride away because you're pointing a gun at me? His hand moved slowly toward his coat, a movement that might have gone unnoticed if Margaret hadn't been watching for exactly such a gesture. I didn't come unprepared, Maggie. I never do. Neither did I, Margaret replied. At her words, the shadows around the ranch yard came alive as her men emerged from their hiding places. Jenkins from beside the barn, Santos from the bunkhouse porch, and 3 others from various positions around the property. Each carried a rifle, and each had it trained on Brady Wilson. As you can see, I'm not alone. These men are loyal to the Rocking H and to me. They won't take kindly to threats against either. Brady's hand froze halfway to his concealed weapon as he assessed the new situation. The odds had shifted dramatically, and for the first time, real fear flickered across his features. 6 against 1, he said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the night air. Hardly seems sporting, Maggie. This isn't a game, Brady. Margaret kept the revolver steady, her resolve unwavering. It's the end of your hold over me. Whatever happened in Kansas City, whatever Victor did or didn't do, it's in the past. I've built a new life here, a legitimate one, and I won't let you destroy it with your greed and bitterness. She took a deep breath, then continued. I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully. By morning, I want you gone from Coyote Creek. If you're still here, or if I ever see you again, I'll go directly to Sheriff Crawford with everything I know about you and your criminal activities since Kansas City. Brady's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. You don't know anything about my life since then. Don't I? Margaret's smile was cold. You think you're the only one with connections, Brady? Victor had friends in places high and low. friends who kept him informed about former associates who might pose a threat. The stagecoach robbery outside Denver in '78. The counterfeiting operation in Cheyenne. The mining company swindle in Deadwood. She was guessing, building on fragments of conversations overheard during Victor's lifetime. But Brady's expression told her she had struck close enough to truth to make her bluff convincing. How many wanted posters carry your likeness, I wonder? How many territories have you fled one step ahead of the law? A muscle twitched in Brady's jaw as he weighed his options. His gaze darted from Margaret to the armed men surrounding him, calculating his chances of success if he drew his weapon. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly in defeat. "You've changed, Maggie," he said, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "There was a time when you would have believed any promise I made." "That time is long past," Margaret replied. "Now, are you leaving, or do my men need to escort you to the property line?" She kept the revolver aimed at his chest, unwilling to lower her guard until he was well away from the ranch. Brady raised his hands slowly in a gesture of surrender. "I know when I'm outmatched. I'll go." His eyes locked with hers one last time, a mixture of anger and something almost like regret in their blue depths. "But remember this, Maggie Harlow, the past never stays buried forever. Sooner or later, it always finds a way to surface." "Perhaps," Margaret acknowledged, "but when it does, I'll face it on my own terms, not yours." She gestured with the revolver toward his horse. "Goodbye, Brady. I won't say it was good to see you again, because we both know that would be a lie." With a final measuring look, Brady turned and descended the porch steps. Under the watchful eyes of Margaret and her men, he mounted his horse with deliberate movements, making no sudden gestures that might be interpreted as a threat. Once in the saddle, he tipped his hat in a mocking salute. "Until next time, Maggie," he called, before turning his mount and riding slowly out of the ranch yard. Margaret maintained her position on the porch, the revolver still ready, until Brady's silhouette disappeared into the darkness. Only then did she lower the weapon, feeling the tension drain from her body, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Jenkins approached, concern evident in his weathered features. "He's gone, Mrs. Harlow. Santos and the boys will keep watch tonight to make sure he doesn't double back." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," Margaret replied, suddenly aware of how close she had come to disaster. "I owe you and the men a great debt tonight. Your loyalty," her voice faltered with emotion, "it means more than I can express." Jenkins shook his head. "No debt, ma'am. The Rocking H takes care of its own. Always has." He hesitated, then added, "That man, he was from your past? Before the ranch?" The question was tentative, respecting boundaries that had always existed between employer and employee. Margaret considered how to answer, how much of her history to reveal to this man, who had stood beside her without question. "Yes," she said finally, "from a life I left behind long ago and have no intention of revisiting." She straightened her shoulders, decision crystallizing in her mind. "But his visit has made one thing clear. It's time for me to establish my own legacy here, not just maintain Victor's." Jenkins nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Whatever you decide, Mrs. Harlow, you have our support. The men and I, we've seen what you can do these past 6 months. Running this ranch isn't just about having the Harlow name. It's about having the strength and wisdom to make the right decisions." He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with such direct speech. "If I may say so, you've proven yourself worthy of the Rocking H, ma'am. Victor would be proud." The simple words, offered without flattery or guile, touched Margaret deeply. In the months since Victor's death, she had fought not just to maintain the ranch, but to earn the respect of men like Jenkins, men who had initially viewed a woman in charge with skepticism at best, derision at worst. Their acceptance, hard-won through daily decisions and shared hardships, was a victory more meaningful than any triumph over Brady Wilson. "Thank you," she said simply. "Now, let's make sure this ranch is secure for the night. Tomorrow will bring challenges of its own." As Jenkins returned to organizing the watch, Margaret tucked Victor's revolver back into her pocket and surveyed the ranch yard. The outbuildings, the distant pastures barely visible in the moonlight. The rocking H was more than land and cattle. It represented the life she had built from the ashes of her past, a legacy she intended to protect and expand in ways Victor had never imagined. Inside the house, Margaret mounted the stairs to her bedroom, her mind already turning to the future. Brady Wilson had threatened to expose her past, but in doing so, he had inadvertently freed her from its shadow. The worst had happened. Her history had found her, and yet she remained standing, her home and reputation intact. Whatever secrets still lingered from those days in St. Louis and the circumstances of her marriage to Victor, they no longer held the power to destroy her. As dawn broke over the Montana mountains, casting golden light across the rocking H, Margaret Harlow stood on her porch once more, watching as her men prepared for the day's work. Santos reported that Brady Wilson had indeed left town during the night, taking the eastbound stage without checking out of the hotel or settling his bill. A hasty departure that suggested he had taken her threats seriously. Sheriff Crawford would undoubtedly have questions about the sudden visitor and his equally sudden disappearance. But Margaret felt prepared to face those inquiries with a confidence she hadn't possessed before. The future stretched before her, filled with challenges both familiar and new, managing the ranch through changing seasons, navigating the shifting dynamics of the cattle business, establishing her own place in this community that had been Victor's before it was hers. But for the first time since his death, Margaret faced these prospects not as Victor Harlow's widow struggling to maintain his legacy, but as a woman coming into her own strength and vision. The bloodstains that might have marked her dress remained metaphorical rather than literal, evidence not of violence averted, but of inner battles won. Brady Wilson had promised to keep her secrets in exchange for her surrender, body and soul. Instead, Margaret had found the courage to face those secrets head-on, reclaiming her narrative and her independence in the process. As she watched the sun rise higher over her land, Margaret smiled at the irony. In attempting to use her past to control her future, Brady had instead liberated her from its power forever. Jenkins approached with her horse saddled and ready for the day's ride to check the north pasture. "Beautiful morning, Mrs. Harlow," he observed, handing her the reins. "Looks like it's going to be a fine day." Margaret mounted with practiced ease, settling into the saddle and taking a moment to appreciate the vista before her. The ranch buildings nestled against the backdrop of mountains, cattle grazing in the distance, ranch hands moving about their tasks with purpose and pride. "Yes, Mr. Jenkins," she agreed, gathering the reins in hands that had grown strong and capable in this hard but rewarding life. "I believe it is." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left